Welcome to Romance Redo. I'm so glad you could make it. Grab a bowl of popcorn and a fuzzy blanket and let's review some movies. I'm Whitney Lynn, author of Closed Door Romances and a developmental editor. Romance Redo is a fun but also informative review of those sweet, cheesy romances we love to love or love to hate, depending on how bad it is. And there can be a ton of groan-worthy moments we've come to associate with those movies. As an author and editor, I can't help pointing out the places that are ridiculous and downright unbelievable. And while I'm at it, I'll also show you how easy it is to fix them so that you can use it when writing your own stories. We'll do a review at the end and then have a constructive conversation about it in the comments. We'll be looking at the movie 40 Below and Falling. It might be difficult to locate because it was also released under the title of Frosty Affair. Can kind of understand why they changed that title. Jewel State, better known for the TV show Firefly as ship mechanic Kaylee, stars as Kate, an elementary school teacher desperate to make it on time for her wedding. Sean Roberts is Redford, the only person that can get Kate home before the big day. Sean already has a few Hallmark movies under his belt, including Mismatched and Recipe for Love. I found 40 Below on Roku, no sponsorship sadly. If you'd like to follow along or watch the movie in its unedited entirety, that's where you can see it for free. A warning, this movie is a bit more, shall I say, spicy than the average cheesy romance I watch, probably on par with more mainstream rom-coms, but the whole thing was one huge lesson in stuff not to do, so I couldn't resist reviewing it. Kate has been teaching at an elementary school, and it's the end of the school year. She's leaving to go back to her hometown to get married.
I'll miss you too. Bye.
Well, that's the last of them. You know what time it is now? It's party time. It's party time. Party time. Party time.
She's supposed to be at the party being held in her honor, but instead she's zooming her fiance Brad and making racy suggestions.
You know, we could...
When she does make it to the party, we get to witness a scene that is wildly inappropriate, starring the vice principal.
Hey! we were dancing.
Allow me a soapbox moment, if you will. This is not the only scene in this movie that tries to put a humorous spin on sexual assault. It doesn't matter how funny you're trying to make it, it's not funny at all. I get putting in SA for dramatic effect, or at least referencing it instead of showing it, but this is supposed to be a light-hearted romance. I'm not sure how the filmmakers justified this. Unless it's absolutely necessary for your plot, please don't do this. The next morning, it's announced a storm has dumped a bunch of snow on the town.
No one's gonna be working today.
Except, apparently, you, Mr. DJ. Kate can't get out of her door. Her car doesn't work, so she walks to the airport, bags in tow. No one seems to be around, and as she's wondering what to do, a man on a snowmobile pulls up to the same trailer. He ignores her greetings and walks inside. Not finding what he's looking for, he's about to leave when Kate tells him she needs to get to Snowy Pines because she's getting married.
I'm getting married in a couple of days in Snowy Pines.
Good luck with that.
Let's review a few plot points that have come up so far. First, did she not think to monitor the weather? If someone has to be somewhere on time and it's the middle of winter in a place in or close to Arctic Canada, wouldn't that be the least she should have done? I've noticed the filmmakers in this movie are asking their audience to do a lot of assuming things happened instead of taking a second or two to make sure they know. It's the same when writing a book. You can't assume your audience will know what you're thinking. It just comes across as if you left something out. Second, we're getting a bit of characterization whiplash with Kate. We've seen her make a plan B, getting herself to the airport by walking there with her luggage. But the moment Redford arrives, she's a helpless damsel? Which one is it? You're introducing your audience to your protagonist, and these first few moments are crucial when establishing character. You can't show her as strong and independent and then suddenly show her as helpless and indecisive without a really, really, really good reason. Make sure you've nailed down your character's personality and the way they would do things so they remain consistent and therefore believable throughout. And third, why is Redford so rude to her? Because this is a rom-com, we're assuming that he is the love interest. And because of his rudeness, we're also going to assume we're dealing with an enemy to lovers scenario. To me, this is almost overkill in rudeness. He completely ignores her greetings, snaps at her for no reason when they're in the trailer, and then tries to drive off, leaving her there. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he has to have deep, meaningful conversations with her, nor that he has to help her at all. But most decent human beings would at least have given her a head nod or at least looked in her direction far earlier. Back to the story. He gets on a snowmobile and looks like he's going to ditch her there. Kate's so frustrated he's leaving, she chucks a candle at his head.
Can you just stop for a second?
Why is one carrying a candle in one's luggage? She could have easily done this with a snowball. That would have made more sense. And another question. If she had hoped at all to make him want to help her, even though the chance was remote, isn't a candle to the head counterproductive? I mean, I wouldn't want to help someone who just assaulted me either. Next, we're introduced to Kate's family. There's Dad, an unlikable person right from the beginning.
Because I am tired of all of this falling onto me. You know, because I don't need this.
I think they were trying to go with Steve Martin's father of the bride, but more whiny. There's long-suffering Mom.
I'm married already. Am I not married already?
Are you giving me a choice, dear?
That is not funny.
And Sister Cindy, who is not only a bit of a brat, but totally disrespectful considering the space they're in.
Hello?
Pastor dude told me I can't stick anything on that holy guy.
Why organize a wedding in a church if the religious artwork is so offensive? Moving along, Kate's fiance Brad announces that Kate is delayed because of the snow and everyone is surprised. Does no one check the weather? And that's it. An almost totally unnecessary scene other than to introduce the family and the fiance. Going back to Redford and Kate, Kate has found her own snowmobile and magically knows where to find Redford's house. I'll concede them one small point. In small towns, everyone knows everyone, but it's implied in the airport scene they don't know each other. And asking someone if they know a tall guy with dark hair and a beard in this area would be like asking if they've seen an Italian at Jersey Shore. So there's no way she could have known how to get more specific, let alone ask anyone where he lived. When writing your own books, make sure you're establishing relationships between people, even if it's only for a short moment, so that it's not so sudden or plucked out of nowhere. This scene could have easily been fixed by her acknowledging she recognized him by his face, either through the town or through the local newspaper, or better yet, maybe he'd been there at the school play to support his neighbor's kid and they see each other there. Before Kate got there, Redford had brains enough to call someone on his cell phone before heading out.
It's about a 3-day trek. I won't have any cell phone reception, so I'll call you when I can, but I'll be there.
So now we know the trip is going to take 3 days and there won't be any cell service where they're going. That's important for later. Kate begs to follow him since they're going to the same place. He tells her no and drives off without her. She, in her infinite wisdom, starts up her own sled but pulls the cord so hard it comes out entirely. And then, in a show of ultimate stupidity, throws the pull cord away and drives off. Do I have to explain why this is dumb? Redford's trip is going smoothly enough, but he knows that Kate is likely following him at a distance. Even though he slides easily under a fallen branch, He stops to throw it off the trail, which I guess is supposed to show us that he can be a compassionate person despite how terrible he's been before. A nice, but in my opinion, an unnecessary gesture, since she could have ducked a little and rode under the branch like he did. He comes to a small drop-off in the trail, and he and his modern sled make the jump with ease. A few seconds later, Kate pulls up to the same drop-off and tries to make the jump in her old jalopy of a sled. Predictably, she crashes and burns. The director probably thought this would be a super funny moment with her clothes flying everywhere, but it makes us roll our eyes instead of laugh. Why? Because what normal person in their right mind would, 1, zoom off a drop instead of just taking it slowly down the side when you don't snowmobile very often, and 2, go anywhere with your luggage unzipped? It's almost as if the director is determined to show us how stupid Kate is instead of merely being inexperienced with the outdoors. If that wasn't enough, we get another head scratcher. Once Kate lands, it looks like she's really hurt herself. Redford rushes to turn her on her back. Without checking her vitals or breathing, he tries to do CPR. Now we get why she might be upset, but then she turns around and screams,
This whole thing is your fault!
His fault? We get she's angry, but how is this his fault when it's obvious common sense has eluded her since she first met him? And she tries to steal a snowmobile.
What is wrong with you, lady?
Truer words never spoken, my guy.
Okay, look, I'm sorry. I should not have tried to follow you.
Or thrown a candle at his head, or thrown a tantrum because of your lack of planning, or tried to steal a snowmobile.
But you can't blame a girl for wanting to get to her wedding on time.
Yes, Kate, we can. You have displayed unhinged behavior in almost everything you've done so far.
You can't push a wedding. You can't push a wedding.
The writer is probably trying to show how stressed Kate is, but it's coming off as unreasonable and insane. My entire problem with the way the director and writer have characterized Kate is that every decision, every reaction she's had doesn't make sense. She's ridden off after Redford with no supplies other than her luggage. She doesn't explore any other alternatives to a snowmobile that we know of. She hasn't tried to call her family to let them know her circumstances that we know of. She's thrown caution to the wind and hoped for the best. This is the kind of behavior that will get you killed in Arctic Canada, and yet it seems like the director and writer hope we see her as spunky and determined. She seems more airheaded and unaware. In a situation like this, you need to establish that a snowmobile trek is her absolute last resort. Not only that, but you have to have a ticking clock to ratchet up the tension. You can't push a wedding isn't a good enough reason. In the movies Planes, Trains, and Automobile, another fantastic Steve Martin film, the weather and the holidays work against the family man just trying to make it home for his daughter's recital on Thanksgiving. He doesn't try trains and automobiles because he thinks it will be a fun adventure, but because flying from New York to Chicago isn't an option until after Thanksgiving is over. He'll miss moments with his family he craves. In Kate's case, the writer could have done a million different things to spike the tension to get home. Maybe her grandma is flying in from another country to be there even though she's in poor health. Her sister's about to give birth, but they want the wedding to happen before she does. Or the day is special to Brad and Kate, and her heart would be broken if they missed it. As an editor, this would require an entire rewrite of motivations between Kate and Redford. We've already seen he can be a nice guy, inasmuch as throwing a tree branch off the road might indicate niceness, and we do find out later in the movie that he does have a caring heart. So why not have him be nice earlier? Like a grouchy knight in shining armor, he reluctantly lets Kate tag along since they're going to the same place. It would have been easy for Kate to appeal to this part of him, like, say, breaking down and crying when she realizes she's going to be late for her wedding. Not in a manipulative way, but in a genuinely heartbroken way. It's against his better judgment, but he can't say no. And Kate, for her part, doesn't have to blame Redford for her poor planning or whine about her circumstances every time she opens her mouth. She happily accepts the ride. Back to the family and Brad. They're still planning the wedding.
That the muffs be real fur.
Yes, well, in your vast experience in dealing with muffs, dear, don't you think it's best to stick to the real thing?
No, Diane. Real fur muffs are not a requirement. Can someone call PETA? Brad enters the room and informs everyone that Kate is moving towards town on a sled with a guy.
Okay, so here's the latest. She's on her way here now, and she's still riding a snowmobile with a guy. But they'll be here in 3 days, and she says not to cancel anything.
How does Brad know this? Kate and Redford are in the back country. There's no cell service there. Remember that from before? This could be what I call a possible CRF, or cutting room floor. An editing snafu where they took something out because the director felt he didn't need it, or to adjust the length of the movie. It's a clumsy attempt at exposition. They could have just said Kate had already left for the airport and her friends in town hadn't seen her since. This is probably because they didn't want to have to call out the Mounties to search for her while maintaining they still think she's coming. But it was a super awkward way of doing it. In this same conversation, it's implied that Kate realizes she might be late by a day and that it's not a big deal to her. But wasn't it a big deal here?
You can't push a wedding. You can't push a wedding.
And hold on, what is Kate's sister doing? Is she trying to be supportive? How is feeling up Brad's arm being supportive? Is she trying to steal her sister's man?
Don't.
Well, at least Dad is somewhat observant. Back to Kate and Redford. They stop for the night at a cabin. It's apparently not either of theirs, but it's empty in its shelter. And just so the writer and director can show how dumb Kate is again, Redford puts her in charge of starting a fire in the stove. Since flicking a couple of matches at full logs isn't doing anything, she finds a container of lighter fluid and empties the whole thing in the stove. Yep, have no idea what's about to happen next. At all.
Kate! Kate!
It's time to bunker down, and we are gifted with a delightful view of Redford's chest. Not complaining. But also we learn he likes to sleep in the nude, which makes total sense, sarcasm alert, considering it's freezing outside and it takes forever with a wood-burning stove to heat a cabin, even as one as small as this. At some point, Redford has to go to the bathroom, so he heads out of the cabin to the outhouse to do his business. While there, a man covered in animal furs emerges from the forest and enters the house. The next thing we hear is Kate screaming for Redford. He runs into the house and sees a crazy-eyed trapper pointing Redford's rifle at Kate. But instead of asking Redford to leave, he kicks Kate out. Redford is apparently to his liking. And here we go with the whole essay soapbox I was on before. I just want to highlight that essay is not funny, even when played for laughs. Doesn't matter if it's directed at a male or a female. It's gross. There are other ways this scene could have played out, ones that had the potential to be funny but also make sense. Here's one I came up with. What if Kate mistook the man for a bear? Kate screams for Redford. He rushes into the house to find her desperately fumbling to use his rifle until Redford takes it away from her. The trapper, totally startled and confused, can only watch as they hurry to gather their stuff and make a run for it. You could even have a beat between the two after they've put some distance between them and the cabin to laugh about how crazy the moment was. Funny and has nothing to do with SA. Back to what actually happened in the movie, Kate surprises both men by attempting, not sure that's the best word for it, to hit the trapper over the head. He turns around in shock and Redford finishes the job. The two escape the cabin and vroom off on the snowmobile. The next morning, Redford offers Kate some beef jerky, which she turns her nose up at. Beef jerky is better than starving since they likely haven't eaten all day yesterday, and it's not like there's a McDonald's over the next hill, so... We also have a moment where Kate is trying to get to know Redford by guessing things about his life. In one of the rare instances of actual humor in this movie, Kate asks Redford about a girl he might have bought a diamond for.
What's her name?
Jody.
Jody. Does she spell it with an I or a Y?
With an I?
Does she dot her I with a little heart?
It's cute for all of about 2 seconds until she once again opens her mouth.
She work at Hooters?
Seeing Redford shut down once again, she tries to apologize.
I'm sorry, I'm not being nice.
Hate to break it to you, but neither of you have been very nice to the other this whole movie. In fact, there hasn't been much niceness or suggestion of attraction between the two of them for that matter. Just because Kate gets a full view of Redford's bum doesn't mean she feels attraction or anything else. This also isn't helped by Jules' lack of emotion on her face as Redford gets into his sleeping bag. Sexual attraction in film beats are added deliberately on the part of the director and actors because they have to be visual. The audience has to see them happening. In a book, it's easy to show them in words. A biting lip when he bends over, a soft touch of the small of her back to help her on her snowmobile, a look that takes a little too long between them. They speed off again until Kate says she has to go to the bathroom. While she's struggling to get her coveralls off, Redford hears twigs snapping nearby. He tackles Kate to the ground as a bear comes through the clearing. In the worst display of playing dead ever, the bear growls, snuffs them, and then wanders off, but not before it destroys some of their bags and the snowmobile. This scene was played for drama and a showcase for how amazing Redford is and how dumb Kate is. Personally, since this is already supposed to be a comedy in the thinnest sense of the word, I would have rewritten the scene like this. The bear snuffles them, then hunkers down next to them to take a nap. Now they're stuck waiting for the bear to wake up and move off. After the bear fiasco, they're forced to walk. A lake appears before them, making them decide if they should cross it or not.
We'll have to cross it. We go around, it'll add an extra day.
A wider shot of where they're standing shows this is not a lake but rather a pond. But they do try to fix this by showing them walking on an actual lake. Still, in reality, the pond they are standing at would only take an extra hour to get around, not days. I digress. Kate and Redford are standing on the shore and he ominously says they're going to have to go across. Kate agrees because frozen lakes are generally safe to walk on and they only get a few yards when suddenly Redford changes his mind. Here's this little conversation.
We gotta turn back.
What? Hey, why? I've seen cars go across lakes before. One guy even had a motorhome. It's gotta be like 2 feet of ice under us.
Yeah, but somewhere between here and that shore, this 2 feet of ice is gonna go down to 1/4 of an inch.
I say we cross it.
This was a conversation best had on the shore, where he should have been a lot more nervous about it, which means one thing. We're setting up for a fall through the ice scenario. Duh. If I were to rewrite this sequence, here's how I would have done it. Redford is nervous to cross the lake because, in his opinion, the weather, while still freezing, has been warmer than it had been, or the sun was shining the whole time. It's still an awkward start since it's winter, and in a place this close to the Arctic, that water is going to be, as Kate says, at least 2 feet thick. He goes against his better judgment and hears scary creaking and cracking noises, which makes him progressively nervous. He proposes going back, but Kate is unwavering in her determination to press forward. She throws a fit because they are about halfway through and she really wants to get home. They argue and she marches forward to force the issue. When he races to catch up to her, they hear the bad kind of cracking noises and then they fall in. Again, another point in the movie where the lack of tension really hurts this scene. They're supposed to have important deadlines to make, but their conversations and body language so far feel more like they're on a nature hike, not like they're in a hurry to be somewhere. The scene I suggested would show that Kate does still care about getting to Snowy Pines and is anxious to move forward. It would also show that Redford too wants to get to where he's going quickly, but feels conflicted about both speed and safety, so he goes ahead against his better judgment. They make it out of the water before Redford collapses. Kate builds them a kindling fire, which honestly won't do much to keep them warm, but Redford's not in a state to care. Back at home, Cindy comes on to the stressed Brad, not listening to her father's warning. During her massage, she tweaks Brad's back. His head flies backwards and breaks her nose. Why mention this when this has almost nothing to do with the forward movement of the plot? Well, because Cindy's reaction is truly Oscar-worthy. Anyway, seems Redford has recovered somewhat from his hypothermia and states,
If we leave the fire in damp clothes, we'll freeze in a matter of hours.
and immediately sheds his clothes to dry over a kindling fire. Still not sure how much help a kindling fire is going to be, but I did learn something from this movie and verified it before I made this video. According to an article by treehugger.com, it's actually better to get naked and dry your clothes out than have wet dripping clothes against the skin. Who'd have thunk? He encourages Kate to do the same.
You ain't got nothing I haven't seen before.
Cute. But she does it anyway, setting up what I was sure was going to be the trope, we need to hug or stand together to preserve body heat. Surprisingly, no. They stand there waiting until their kindling fire can dry their clothes, and Redford's being creepy by turning around to take peeks at the naked Kate. So far, Redford has been the voice of reason, but now he's decided they need the bag that fell in the water and plans to take one more plunge after he's just gotten dry. He gets naked once again, naked count number 3,
Any excuse to get naked.
and jumps in. Between their falling into the water and Redford going in for a second time, it makes me think neither the director nor the writer have ever plunged into ice-cold water before. According to ohiohealth.com, there are specific physiological responses your body has to hitting water that cold. And considering they're the only two out there, and he's already been in there once, it seems foolhardy at best to go in a second time. All this to ask the question, what did they need out of that bag so badly that Redford would be willing to risk his life for? Any reasonable person would just call it a loss and move on. And they don't ever establish a specific reason he needs the bag other than he does. That's lazy. There is a book Redford keeps Kate from looking at and seems important to him, but it's rarely brought up before this point, and we don't understand its significance until later in the movie. If we knew more about it, we might be inclined to assume that's what he's after, but we don't, and the whole situation seems unnecessarily dangerous. If you wanted to establish what was so important about the bag, then you might be able to fix this by having an argument between Kate and Redford about it before he goes into the water, where he has to admit why killing himself would be preferable to losing the bag. But I have a feeling that this scene, too, is a victim of CRF. You might be inclined to worry about Redford after the second plunge, but no need. In the next shot, he's fine. He's in dry clothes and thrilled with their kindling fire. We have another moment of getting to know each other when he says to her,
If we stick together, we stand a pretty good shot.
let's see. You've only existed on rations, fallen in a frozen lake, twice for Redford, trespassed on someone's cabin, and run around naked in sub-zero temps. Yep, total recipe for survival. The next morning, we get a super cute scene between Redford and Kate.
Oh my God. That'll wake you up.
I think you probably missed a spot.
No,
here.
I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't miss it.
All right, okay. Showers are over.
I think this was supposed to show sexual tension. It doesn't really, more like two friends goofing off. It is, however, a sincere moment between the two regardless, and a palate cleanser for what happens next. They finally come upon some civilization in the form of an oil drill outpost.
I'll go steal us some wheels, you steal us some food.
Okay, no, I'm not stealing anything.
It's a surprisingly sensible comment coming from her, but it doesn't last long. She makes her way into the barracks and gets into the fridge when she runs into the guy inside, and Redford and Kate make a break for it in a snowcat. A machine that might go 8 miles per hour? That'll make for a quick getaway. Regardless, they finally have some wheels. Did you know in Canada you can get a DWI while driving a snowcat? You can. Anyway, their getaway ride doesn't last long because the thing runs out of gas. Yet somehow they make it to a motel where, wait for it, there's only one bed. While Redford is showering, Kate can't help herself any longer. She grabs the book that Redford had been hiding from her the whole movie and finds a picture of a young woman and a little girl inside. She hurries to get some clothes and a jacket on and shouts,
I was this close to throwing my life away.
"Wait, what? Doing what? Was she thinking of sleeping with him?" This is hard to swallow because their relationship to this point has either been frosty or platonic. We're just supposed to assume that the attraction between them is so strong she'd cheat on her fiancé. Okay. He discovers she's looked through his stuff and rightfully gets angry. She leaves in a taxi and is done with Redford, which makes you wonder why she didn't call a taxi in the first place. Back at her parents' house, Brad comes to spend some time with Kate before their wedding that afternoon.
Nothing will ever happen to you again.
It's a haunting peek at what her future will be like with him. She's now having serious doubts about Brad and the wedding. Next, we'll get a little pep talk with Mom. Mom suspects Kate's having doubts, but tells her daughter she will be supportive of whatever Kate decides, and Kate decides to go through with the wedding. Meanwhile, Redford is at a restaurant with a little girl and a woman. They never explain who the woman is, and the little girl is obviously important to him, and they sort of look like the two that Kate saw in the picture. Then the weirdest, most muddy conversation happens between the two adults.
Redford, I never thought he was coming back.
I know. I'm sorry for the way I handled things. I truly am.
That's it. No other explanation and no clarity. The way this scene is set up is cheap. It's not necessarily wrong, but let me point out that we've been building up to this moment the whole movie. Even when we find out that Jody is his mom, she tells Kate there is another reason Redford is the way he is. We want to know why Redford is so reticent and secretive, and make sure there are no ties that bind him so he can be with Kate. The writer owes us that much of an explanation. It doesn't have to be a grand information dump, but I feel like it needed to be a bit more informative than it was. Finally, Kate's wedding begins, but midway through she stops to dump Brad in front of a church full of people.
I can't. I'm so sorry, Brad.
Poor Brad. She's been thinking about her time with Redford and she can't do it, so she runs down the aisle, goes outside in time to see Redford pulling up like a knight on shining snowmobile, and they take off for their happily ever after. So let's talk about what this movie did right, and then we'll go over the things it didn't. They did a good job of setting up why Kate might want to stay in the small town. She loved the kids and loved teaching, which makes it easier for us to believe she would have had no problem living with Redford in the middle of nowhere, despite being a city girl. I personally loved Redford's name. It says rough, tumble, and sexy. And we have First Nations rep, albeit briefly. My first problem that extends through the whole movie was with Kate. She's a protagonist with no sense of self-preservation. Her reactions are unrealistic and over the top. She does stuff and doesn't think them through, and the writer tries to play it off as she's spunky and stubborn. My feminist sensibilities tells me that the male writer of this script views women as over-emotional and damsels in distress, not giving them the benefit of being thinking people. People unfamiliar with their environment tend to be more cautious to their detriment, not the other way around like Kate is. Jokes abound in this movie, mostly at Kate's expense, like when she tries to steal his snowmobile or stares stupidly at her sleeve being on fire. Kate's issue actually tie into bigger plot problems, but we'll get to that in a minute. The way the writer characterized Redford's not off the hook entirely either. Kate's helplessness doesn't make Redford more manly. It gives him a tendency to be condescending and mansplaining. And given this is supposed to be a rom-com, the writer breaks the #1 rule for this genre: tell it from the female gaze. He gives us some chest hair, but he doesn't see Redford the way a woman would. The writer shows us Redford's grit, determination, and aptitude, but as women, we also want to see his vulnerability, caring, and concern for Kate. The best we get is, "You're my responsibility," said with anger and a whole lot of entitlement. As I mentioned before, there was hardly any sexual tension build up between Redford and Kate, and when it came to the climax, the whole thing felt off. As a writer, you need to show those small moments between your protagonist and love interest that build to a crescendo at the climax. Not a pun. You can't assume the readers know the level of attraction they have for each other. You have to show it. One of the best resources I had to help with this was a study done by Desmond Morris about human intimacy. Romance author Jamie Gold does an excellent job of breaking down each of the steps so that you can use it to build intimacy that feels naturally progressive. The stages are: 1. Eye to body, we size each other up. 2. Eye to eye, we connect with eye contact. 3. Voice to voice, we talk to each other, either with flirting or banter. 4. Hand to hand, that first tentative touch, not just to hands but anywhere. 5. Arm to shoulder, we find we want to be closer to that person but not yet ready to fully engage. 6. Arm to waist, a safe but intimate way of touching the other person, side hugs or putting a hand on the small of the back. 7. Mouth to mouth, the first kiss. 8. Hand to head, a more intimate touch like the caress of a cheek. 9. Body to body, for the sake of closed-door romance, comfort in full-body touching like a tight hug. There are more steps that don't apply if you write sweet or closed-door romances, so if you're interested in the rest, I've put a link to the article in the description box. These are not hard and fast rules. They are a guideline you can use to establish beats that bring your lovers together. Lastly, the biggest problem with this movie is what I call round peg, square hole syndrome. Making a scene or situation happen so that it achieves a goal, even if the circumstances don't make sense. It's like trying to push a round peg through a square hole. You might succeed in shoving it in, but it takes more effort and it doesn't look right. This is what I was referring to back when I was talking about Kate. Her reactions and decisions fall into this syndrome almost all the time. Kate's reactions should make sense, but they don't. The writer is trying to force her to do or say things so that the scene goes the way he needs it to, instead of letting the natural consequences of her actions or words steer the story. Like, for example, she's determined to follow Redford, even though she could do a million other things to achieve her goal that make more sense. But the writer wanted her and Redford to go on a backwoods adventure, so he makes it fit, and it comes off as false. Let's take another example. When they fall through the ice. The writer wanted to include a fall through the ice trope in that scene. However, anyone with common sense would avoid venturing out if they suspected that the ice might not be thick enough. He had to give his characters thin and unrealistic reasoning to get the job done. In the end, your audience is saying, yeah, right. Sometimes as a writer, it's easy to get lost in the story, so it's hard to see where these missteps are taken. It's why it's good to have a trusted friend or family member, or might I say an editor, have a look at your story to tell you where they find their yeah right moments. Once you find them, it might take a little work, but you can then plan how to fix them so that your story flows better. That's it for 40 and Below and Falling. Let me know what you thought of my assessment of 40 Below. Did you agree with me, or was there something I missed? Or did you totally disagree with me? Let me know in the comments and we'll discuss it. And if you're interested in my books or my developmental editing services, I've linked all my information in the description box below. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next month.